Science is a trade just like any other. It takes skill and discipline and sweat. And if you trust the man who rebuilds your engine, you can trust the woman forecasting the fire that could burn your house down. Please perceive these scientists as public servants, not distant elites. The scientists that I know, they are doers, not talkers.
Hello and welcome, Laws of Notion podcast listeners. I'm Kristan Uhlenbrock, and I'm excited to bring you our fourth episode in the Compass series, where we are navigating our current state of affairs related to science and policy. For this week, we're discussing the value of scientific research to our economy and our communities with Dan Powers, Executive Director of CoLabs. CoLabs is a Colorado nonprofit that was established in 2007 to support the more than 30 federally funded scientific research laboratories in our state by building connections and providing education on the critical role federal research funding plays to our society. I hope you enjoy our conversation. Dan, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for asking me to speak about this really important, even historic and crucial setting that we're in right now.
Dan, tell me a little bit. Who is CoLabs? What do you all do?
CoLabs is an 18-year-old nonprofit, Kristan, that got started in the mid-2000s in reaction to the potential for some federally funded research labs in Colorado being moved out of state. So over the last nearly 2 decades, we've continued to connect these labs with each other in Colorado so they know where they can partner and how they could leverage each other's resources, and also tell that story of the successful impacts of investing in science as both assets to Colorado and to the country.
Thank you. We all have been following a lot of news coming out about some of the recent proposed federal funding cuts to agencies such as the National Science Foundation, National Institutes of Health, NOAA, many others. What consequences do you anticipate for both the ongoing research projects that exist in Colorado and just the broader innovation ecosystem that exists here with these proposed cuts?
It's not being too dramatic right now to characterize what's going on as a dismantling of 70 plus years of American scientific backbone and global leadership in science. It's astounding what we have seen as the proposed and intended, as well as already immediate impacts to the personnel and projects at federally funded research labs here in Colorado. We're fortunate in Colorado, perhaps ironically, to have the second highest concentration of federally funded research entities in the country outside of Washington, D.C. The spectrum of research that goes back to the 50s here include public health and robotics and aerospace and energy and earth sciences. Of course, a large faction of atmospheric science and weather, climate-related research is here, as well as transportation and ecology. But now we're into the realms, of course, of quantum physics, quantum computing, and other types of real innovative technologies. So pick a federal agency that's working on something and it has had proposed cuts to its budgets already happen or are right now imminently on the table. So we've had a challenge as a outside advocate getting exact numbers on the people who have been laid off. The default response by federal agencies has been, we don't discuss personnel issues, or you'll have to take that up with the agency communications folks in Washington, D.C., those kind of replies. So we're having to piece together what has occurred already, and an estimate of several hundred probationary employees having been laid off across several different federal agencies is as much as we can, I wouldn't even say confirm yet, but we can assess and estimate at this point. The initial impacts have been to federal agencies such as the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the U.S. Department of Commerce, and now we're seeing Department of Energy. Just last week, there were layoffs at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, and there are more imminent layoffs that are expected, born of some of the budget proposals that have been put forth to Congress.
Talk to me about what that unique value is of having federally funded research.
The way to consider federally funded research, and again, this is a strategic and philosophical decision going back to World War II by our country, coming out of World War II, the notion of we should be investing in our own brilliance to understand the foundational aspects of how the universe operates, that we will be drawing on our own country's brilliance to understand exactly how the world works. And we really got started with energy technologies, and then that grew into different realms of public health and food production, and then additional technologies around communications and transportation, robots and going to the moon, etc. So there's been this intention for our country to be the source of our scientific understanding for both national security and national prosperity. Bring that context up to today, and it may be that many people are taking for granted or otherwise simply haven't thought about how the different technologies that enable our 2025 first world society, how did they come about? I'm concerned there's also a perception that much of the, quote, brilliant technologies are coming from companies and not from the government. And the reality is that there's much more of a long-standing partnership between the private sector, investors, and the federal government. And broadly speaking, that is really the way to perceive federally funded research, is that taxpayers invest in very fundamental research and ways to partner with private sector companies and often universities as well. And from there, the actual tangible solutions, companies, products, and services are manifest out into the world. And that's what we all get to use to enable and empower and make our lives more safe and resilient.
Dan, do you have a good example from here in Colorado that you can think of where the research started with one of our federally funded labs? It got to a further stage in our knowledge base and usefulness, and then there became a public-private partnership or some sort of relational transfer from that research to that application, the operations, the product side.
Yes, there's really several. Let's start with a quick example in the renewable energy realm with the National Center for Atmospheric Research and also the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. Their combined projects around the potential to leverage solar energy as a power source goes back several decades, has led to the advancement of solar energy technologies that initially, when they were started in the 70s, seemed to be extremely expensive and perhaps not even very, let's say, not very feasible in terms of doing this at scale. But over now the last 20, even 30 years, the ratio of the expense for this kind of technology and its impacts and its ability to provide power at a price that is equal to or even less than legacy technologies, legacy fossil fuels, has made this a power source that is even used by the military and other parts of our society where those kind of legacy fossil fuels might be more difficult to access or to otherwise put to use. There's also, in the realm of quantum computing that we're on the forefront of, that goes back decades at the then National Bureau of Standards, which has become the National Institutes of Standards and Technology in Boulder, and their ability to understand the interplay of atoms and what actually makes up physical matter. They've been building on that technology to inform a range of digital communication technologies into the realm of GPS. Anyone who's using GPS to navigate on their phone to get around to errands, that kind of technology has its taproot back into the National Institute of Standards and Technologies. And then their partnership with the University of Colorado with GILA is the acronym for the Research Institute at CU Boulder. They are on the forefront now of our quantum computing and other types of advanced computing technologies. The computing power that these types of advanced computing systems bring to society are be able to solve modeling problems around wildfire research or wildfire prediction or other types of atmospheric extreme weather events, and also figuring out ways to address vaccine research. All of this gets down to what are the fundamental makeup or fundamental dynamics of atoms, of what actually makes the world work. And with that knowledge, they're able to solve problems and otherwise map out options for how to deal with extreme weather, with diseases, and creation of additional technologies that we use, from smartphones to robotics to other types of medical devices.
Yeah, so talk to me a little bit about the economic value that research plays here in our state of Colorado. And then also a little bit about why taxpayer funded scientific research is a critical investment, even during times of fiscal constraint.
One of the best ways to look at the economic impact and why it's valuable to be investing taxpayer dollars in science. Thematically, what this type of research does is provide long-term risk mitigation against not only, say, threats, things like extreme weather or diseases, but against global competitive threats in an economic sense. That kind of early stage investment going back decades is what has enabled us to then be at the forefront of different innovations going forward over the different decades. That, as a intentional strategic decision by our country, is what we're seeing being threatened right now. What we're seeing are proposals to eliminate a budget of 45% or 50%, or eliminate staffing of 20%, 40%. We, our voters, Americans, are being told we're cutting back this much. And that's about as thought through as it seems to be. It appears that there is just a wholesale anti-government type of motive to ripping out chunks of the federal research that's happening across the country. There's a lot of it here in Colorado. But that challenge then, Kristan, is both astounding and surreal. It's a bit like choosing to unplug your refrigerator to save money on electricity costs, and your food will be okay for a few days, but it's not going to be good in a couple weeks. We are seeming to be taking out vast aspects of our national infrastructure of scientific research with no plan for mitigation or replacement. Another theme I'd ask people to consider is that the reason why there are taxpayer-funded research laboratories is not only that there's this long-term outlook, but that the projects that are being invested in are more for a public good, for public benefit, as opposed to a short-term private sector profit motive. And things like researching how to protect against environmental disasters, or to invest in public health, to invest in even things like robotics, aerospace, transportation, energy sources. These are not necessarily themes that a company could invest in at scale and try things and fail at times along the way over years/decades. That is not what companies are looking to do. It would not be necessarily a practical application of their investors' money to be risking this kind of experimentation on new technologies. But that's what we do as a country, to invest in technologies that ultimately benefit all of our society. We're hearing from companies that have contracts with numerous federal agencies. These contracts appear to be arbitrarily being canceled. Those companies are wondering, how can that be? This is a contract that we have. Dissolving these contractual relationships with private sector companies are going to have more and more immediate impacts in employment or otherwise financial impacts to the private sector. That is the part that in many ways is so confusing, because there is not a plan, and more so not a strategy. It doesn't appear that we can get answers on why such decisions to cut massive amounts of federal agencies' budgets are in our long-term best interest as a country and in the short-term best interest with these partnerships in the private sector.
There's real impacts and then there's ripple impacts that we are seeing. One of them that I've been hearing talked about is a brain drain or a lost generation of scientists due to the funding uncertainty environment that we may be finding ourselves in right now. What is at stake if we see an exodus of scientific talent? How might this impact us here, whether it's in Colorado or in the US for our global competitiveness?
There's three aspects to what's happening with these staff layoffs and budget cuts. First is the immediate loss of institutional intellectual knowledge. We can add up, somewhat anecdotally, literally thousands of years of knowledge within a few months leaving the federal government. If any company or even entire industry was perceiving that they were going to lose that amount of intellectual capacity, there would at least be some kind of mitigation plan that could be pointed to of, yes, however, here's what we're going to do next. But also what that then rolls into is the younger generation of scientists who are looking at this situation perceive the federal government for the next several years at this point as being unreliable as an employer if there ends up being a version of a recall or a reprioritization of certain parts of the government's research that was shut down. Well, we're hiring you back. The lure of those really stable jobs with the government will not have the same kind of lure as they have for decades. As a country, we may be losing an entire generation's knowledge and interest in public service and science. And the vacuum that's being created by that uncertainty is being picked up immediately, particularly in Europe. But this is not really luring away people as much as providing an opportunity that our country right now is dissolving. Entities around the globe are recognizing this and are going to make their country's scientific research more attractive to those younger scientists. Thirdly, the hobbling of databases. We know anecdotally that at certain federal agencies, the online digital storage capacity for their research, those contracts with Amazon Web Services, for example. Did you know that the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, their data for numerous realms of research are actually housed on Amazon Web Services servers? And the contract for NOAA has been for much of their data. This is where we also, again, can't get clear information on exactly which data you're talking about. At a high level, they'll say that contract, they, meaning the Department of Commerce, has said, this contract with Amazon Web Services is being canceled the middle of July. What's going to happen to the data that is on there? That contract is being canceled the middle of July. That is all the kind of feedback that those of us in the science advocacy realm get as answers to that. That is also what is at stake across various federal agencies, are the dissolution of data that is in the digital realm. Brainpower and digital data being lost means that we are intentionally pausing our participation in an ongoing marathon that really never ends in terms of scientific discovery. The United States right now is deciding to pause, and other countries are looking over their shoulder as they continue to run forward, investing in science with a mix of astonishment and I would say it's sometimes almost delight as to, wow, if the United States wants to hobble its own scientific investment, we're going to continue to run forward. We've been trying to catch up with them for decades. In many cases, we're neck and neck or even are a little bit ahead. But the fact that the United States right now is going to decide to check out and just tie their shoes for a while, who knows how long, that is, again, astounding. And we should consider what's happening to the dismantling of federal research right now in that context of there is an ongoing global marathon for scientific discovery that at the bottom line impacts a country's ability to invest in its national security and its national prosperity. And through a astounding and unclear set of decisions by our current leadership, choosing to step out of that race and diminish our ability to stay in the race and lead that race as we have for decades. Any person who is involved in business should be looking at where their supply chain and where their customers are engaged in any kind of activity that connects with federally funded research. And that can be as fundamental as where they get their communication technology, how they stay, frankly, as basic as educated, fed, and have clean air and water. If these fundamental services that the government has provided to keep our society informed and resilient and safe, let alone empowered and providing opportunities to grow, the ripple effects of this dissolution of our federal agencies' research can't help but then ripple into the business world at both a local level and, say, global multinational levels. Maybe ironically, when that ripple effect starts to hit, we will have more people start to ask questions and engage in what are the decisions right now of the administration to cut science. But it's such a self-inflicted wound, such an unnecessary way to get people to ask questions about what does investment in science mean and why is it valuable? And in that time, we are losing our status and losing our ability to keep pace with both friends and not friends around the globe. Something we've never quite dealt with, at least in my lifetime, is looking to other countries for the leading answers and innovations around technologies that shape our lives. And unfortunately, that could be one of the longer term impacts of these decisions being made right now around how to fund or not fund science in America.
We've seen from Pew Research data and other survey data that investing in scientific research from the government isn't necessarily a red or blue issue. Most people, about 8 in 10 Americans, show that it's worthwhile for the government to invest in scientific research. So this isn't a red versus blue issue per se. It should be an us issue about how do we view investments in science here in the US. What strategies do you have that you have found most effective for communicating the value of our government-funded or federal-funded research labs and research projects that can stretch across the political spectrum?
I think this question gets to a theme that those of us as science communicators need to get better at if we actually had been more accomplished at describing the value of scientific research investment and the role of scientists. We may not be in this situation now. The value of science really gets down to perception of the value of science, gets down to a feeling of trust. And in the ways that most people trust and grow to trust their car mechanic or their dentist or their doctor, it's that they see those people as practical and hardworking and honest, and that they've made efforts over years to grow their skills. And I think if we focus on the craftsmanship of science, not just expertise, just like a master carpenter or a diesel mechanic, federal scientist is someone who spent years learning their skill and crafting it. And it's that they believe in doing something also to benefit society. No one became a wildfire researcher at NOAA to be famous, and certainly not to be rich. If we help to describe in a values sort of way that a person choosing to spend years developing practical wisdom and understanding in a realm that most people might not understand, but that they know people will benefit by that knowledge. Even a favorite restaurant you have where you realize those chefs and those recipes are awesome. They're not just something that people pick up and understand in a month. They've gotten good at this and are in demand because they've been doing this for years. The same case can be made for scientists who are leaning into understanding hard problems and want to work on what are challenges to then inform the rest of the country, to inform their fellow citizens. And I believe by talking about their craft and the grit and the hours that no one sees working in a lab and the reading is all in the context of ultimately patriotism. Really, you choose to work for the government because you know that the ripple effect of your work is to be spread out to everybody. And that's aspirational and admirable, and is a way to frame why scientists do what they do that I look forward to doing in conversations with people who right now are otherwise skeptical or even supportive of just defund the government because they're wasting money anyways. That's one end of a spectrum. I'm coming from another, but there is a middle ground here to describe the value of what scientists do, and in language that is very similar to why people support other professions that they interact with every day. You just perhaps didn't realize it. You picked up your phone this morning. 90% of the apps that you were looking at there have some taproot to your tax dollars. So thank you.
Dan, thank you so much for being with me today. Thank you for this conversation. If people wanted to find out more about the work that you all are doing, the work of CoLabs, anything that you want to direct people to learn more?
Definitely. Our website is co-labs.org. And also, please look for us on LinkedIn, where we share a lot of news information. If you've been affected by any of the layoffs or budget cuts to federal agencies, we have an open survey. We know people are uncertain right now about speaking up, so you can leave information anonymously, or you can provide your contact information if you'd like to be reached for further conversation. Pay attention to the news about potential and actual cuts to science, and CoLabs can be a resource for providing some more context on just what's happening, at least here in Colorado.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. To learn more about the Institute and this series, visit us at institute.dmns.org and be sure to sign up for our mailing list. Thanks and see you soon.